Hello everybody, welcome back to our second online lecture in Economic Studies in English. In this lecture, we will complete explaining Chapter 3, Welfare Economics. In the previous lecture, we said that welfare economics is a normative branch of economics. Its main aim is studying the best way of allocating our scarce resources in order to maximize the social welfare. And we said that the social welfare means the well-being of the entire society, and that it differs from standard of living as it's more concerned with the quality of life. Welfare economics also serves as a base to many applied branches of economics, such as public finance. We also said that a combination of welfare economics and behavioral economics create a new subfield called behavioral welfare economics. The main idea in welfare economics is that it takes all the preferences of individuals at the microeconomic level and applies them in the macroeconomic level. It's difficult to find a single economic welfare measure for all individuals because the preferences of individuals differ from one to another. Accordingly, the basic goal of welfare economics is to develop a common measure or a common criteria. And we said that the first attempt was made by Powell Samuelson, who constructed a social welfare function. The social welfare function takes the preferences of each consumer and aggregates them into a community preference ordering, and then rank the possible allocations of resources in terms of the needed social welfare. After that, we explained social utility and said that it's equal to the sum of individuals' utilities. Accordingly, there are two measures of social welfare, which are cardinal utility and ordinal utility. And we started talking about cardinal utility. And we said that it's based on the assumption that utility is a measurable scale of consumer satisfaction, which can be expressed in numbers. And the units of measuring utility are called utils. The main points of this lecture are assumptions of cardinal utility, ordinal utility, assumptions of ordinal utility, Pareto efficiency or optimality. Assumptions of cardinal utility. The cardinal utility approach depends on the following assumptions. Rationality. It's assumed that the consumers are rational and they satisfy their wants in the order of their preference, which means that they will purchase those commodities which gives the highest utility first, and then the second highest, and so on. Limited resources or money. The consumer has limited money to spend on the purchase of goods and services, and thus this makes the consumer buy those commodities first, which is a necessity. Maximize satisfaction. Every consumer aims at maximizing his or her satisfaction for the amount of money he or she spends on the goods and services. Utility is cardinally measurable. It's assumed that the utility is measurable, and the utility derived from one unit of the commodity is equal to the amount of money which a consumer is ready to pay for it. For an example, one util equals 1 unit of money. Diminishing marginal utility. This means with the increased consumption of a commodity, the utility derived from each successive unit goes on diminishing, which means that additional consumption provides smaller and smaller increases in utility. Marginal utility of money is constant. It's assumed that the marginal utility of money remains constant irrespective of the level of consumers' income. which means that it doesn't matter if the consumer is poor or rich. In both cases, the utility of money is constant. Utility is additive. The cardinalists believe that only the utility is measurable, but also the utility derived from the consumption of different commodities are added up to realize the total utility. With these assumptions, it's possible to construct a social welfare function simply by summing all the individual utility functions. But some economists doubt whether a cardinal utility function or cardinal social welfare function is of any value. The reason given is that it's difficult to aggregate the utilities of various people that have differing marginal utility of money, such as the wealthy and the poor. However, once economists rejected the idea that utility was measurable, then they had to accept that economic welfare is immeasurable. This led to a search for welfare criteria, which avoided making interpersonal comparisons of utility by introducing explicit value judgments as to whether or not welfare has increased. Ordinal utility. The modern economists have rejected the concept of cardinal utility and instead applied ordinal utility approach to study the behavior of the consumers. The ordinal utility approach is based on the fact that the utility of a commodity can't be measured in absolute quantity, but however, it will be possible for a consumer to tell subjectively whether the commodity drives more or less or equal satisfaction when compared to another. The modern economist Hayek has applied the ordinal utility concept. He introduced a tool of analysis called the indifference curve to analyze the consumer behavior. An indifference curve refers to the locus of points, each showing different combinations of two substitutes, which yield the same level of satisfaction and utility to the consumer. Assumptions of ordinal utility. The ordinal utility approach depends on the following assumptions. Rationality. It's assumed that the consumer is rational. He aims at maximizing his level of satisfaction for given income and prices of goods and services, which he wishes to consume. He is expected to take decisions consistent with this objective. Ordinal utility. The indifference curve assumes that the utility can only be expressed ordinally. This means the consumer can only tell his order of preference for the given goods and services. Transitivity and consistency of choice. The consumer's choice is expected to be either transitive or consistent. The transitivity of choice means if the consumer prefers commodity X to Y and commodity Y to Z, then he must prefer commodity X to Z. In other words, if commodity X equal commodity Y and commodity Y equal commodity Z, then he must treat commodity X equal commodity Z. The consistency of choice means that if a consumer prefers commodity X to Y at one point of time, he will not prefer commodity Y to X in another period, or even will not consider them as equal. No satiety. It's assumed that the consumer has not reached the saturation point of any commodity, and hence he prefers larger quantities of all commodities. Diminishing marginal rate of substitution. The marginal rate of substitution refers to the rate at which the consumer is ready to substitute one commodity A for another commodity B, in such a way that his total satisfaction remains unchanged. The most significant of all are concerns about the limits of the utilitarian approach to welfare economics. Pareto efficiency or optimality. The simplest criterion was developed by Vilfredo Pareto, who argued that in reallocation of resources involving a change in goods produced and their distribution among consumers could be considered an improvement if it made some people better off without making anyone else worse off. This analysis led to the development of the conditions for Pareto efficiency or optimality, which would maximize the economic welfare of the community for a given distribution of income. It's logical that a well-developed and stable society should provide the population with all the basic needs without unfairness to the rest of the population. The production of consumption equilibrium led to the Pareto optimum results. The Pareto criterion avoids making interpersonal comparisons by dealing only with undateable cases where no one is harmed. However, this makes the criterion inapplicable to the majority of policy proposals, as any change usually makes some people better off while making others worse off without compensation. Accordingly, economists suggested an alternative criterion, the compensation principle, proposing that any economic change or reorganization should be considered beneficial if, after the change, gainers could hypothetically compensate the losers and still be better off. In effect, this criterion subdivides the effects of any change into two parts: efficiency, gains or losses, income distribution consequences. As long as the gainers evaluate their gains at a higher figure than the value that losers set upon their losses, then this efficiency gains justifies the change even though income redistribution has occurred. Where the gainers from a change fully compensate the losers and still show a net gain, this would rate as an improvement under the Pareto criterion. Despite its methodological details, welfare economics is increasingly needed to judge economic changes, in particular rising problems of environmental pollution that adversely affect some people while benefiting others. Widespread adoption of the polluter pays principle reflects a willingness of governments to make interpersonal comparisons of utility and to intervene in markets to force polluters to bear the costs of any pollution that they cause. By this, we have finished chapter 3, and the next lecture we will take a new chapter.